Myths. My name is Emily Miller. My background is funeral directing, embalming. I worked in the conventional funeral cemetery industry until I founded my own company. It's Colorado Burial Preserve in Florence, Colorado. It's a natural burial ground. And so I have 1 foot in cemetery and 1 foot in funeral side. And now I do this, trying to teach my community about the benefits of natural burial, and also turn around and teach my industry, the funeral homes and cemeteries, how they can embrace sustainability and take advantage of the fact that we have a rising amount of interest around natural death care options. My partner tonight is Dawn.
Yeah, so I come to the Green Burial Council from a marketing background, and originally learned about green burial just through research and was immediately intrigued about this alternative. So just contacted them through volunteer basis and then ended up transitioning into a board position and trying to extend marketing skills into helping communicate the message about Green Barrel, which is perfect for tonight because there's a lot of myths and misinformation surrounding it. So that's where I kind of try to help along those lines.
I like working with you, Dawn, because I do come from this funeral and cemetery background. Some of the things that are like old hat to me, kind of obvious, I need to check myself on, wait, what would someone who's never had to do this before want to know about?
Right.
Or what is self-evident, and what does need to be yeah, explained in greater detail. So the
For
green.
those of us who don't speak funeral speak all the time or cemetery speak all the time. Yeah.
Totally, totally.
Yep.
And the GBC does have 2 missions that kind of reflects this. So we offer a voluntary credential for funeral homes, cemeteries, and natural burial product providers. And so we offer the seal of approval to sort of be a way for consumers to be able to find green friendly funeral homes and cemeteries. And also as a way to prevent greenwashing, to sort of say, you can only get the seal of approval if you're actually doing the things right. But then that number 2 is our mission to educate the public around how to access green burial in your area, why you would want to, and of course, correcting misinformation, what we're doing here this evening. The core principles that attract us all to natural burial or green burial are: we can care for the dead with less environmental impact, and we can also do some good around conservation with land usage when you rethink the cemetery as a natural resource and not just a man-made commodity. So we would reduce carbon emissions of death care. We reduce worker exposure to formaldehyde when we choose natural burial. We have this opportunity to give back to the actual place where the burial is taking place, with restoration or preservation of habitat. And another tenet of green burial is that family and loved ones ought to be involved if they want to be, that it is both natural and beneficial to be a part of the burial process when desired. And so even though that's not specific to do with the carbon footprint of a burial, it's a really important part of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. So just a little bit of a definition of what green burial or natural burial is out there. So this is when everything is biodegradable that we bury, and that includes the body. There's going to be no toxic chemicals such as formaldehyde. Firstly, we don't want to put those toxins into the earth. And secondly, one of the tenets of green burial is that we're not going to resist or slow the return of the body into the soil through those natural processes. So there's no need for chemical preservation if we're trying to embrace the chemical processes. Similarly, we don't have vaults. A vault is also called an outer burial container. And that is this impervious protection for the casket. But if we want to embrace the return of the body to the soil, then we don't want a vault, and we want all of the containers or shrouds to be biodegradable. So in the cemetery, a natural burial can also come with a greener management of the land. So that would be fewer chemicals in the herbicide, pesticide, or fertilizer category. It might also be around what we're planting, native species, resilient plants that are going to sequester carbon, those type of things. Some natural burial grounds have, I mean, they all have different policies, but the idea is that for instead of a headstone or marker, we're going to use something that blends with the natural environment, or is very subtle. You can hardly tell that there's something there at all. And some natural burial cemeteries may also be in conjunction with conservation, meaning there's permanent deed easements, a change to the status of the land that's going to protect it in perpetuity as an open space. So that's what a green cemetery is trying to do. Let's look at what some of the myths are around burial in a green cemetery.
And this is actually one I immediately, as soon as I started learning about green burial and talking to people about it, it's the first question people ask, what? I've never heard of that. Is that new? Like, when did this come about? And it's actually not new at all, which was news to me. But helping people understand that this has been around for a very long time is is a great way to start the conversation about green burial.
Totally. I was just thinking about that earlier today. You know, our mother's mother, and everyone she knew would have been just naturally returned to the earth upon their death. Before the modern cemetery and funeral business came about as a profession or an industry, almost anyone everywhere on earth would have been buried in this way. It's a pre-technological way of dealing with the problem with what to do when someone has died. So we see it called green burial, is sort of a newer term to really emphasizes the fact that it's eco-friendly. But I also use the term natural burial, which to me sort of emphasizes this fact that it's a very human thing to do, to care for the dead, and that yeah, earth burial is among the most ancient of all returns. Of course, we also see it in traditional religions, Judaism, Islam. Plenty of folks are interested in kind of a simple return with no extra. For example, in Judaism, the teaching is that we don't want to delay or hasten the return of the body to the earth, but rather that just the appropriate pace is burial, and then Mother Nature takes care of the rest. So even though it can feel like a new trend in our funeral services, in fact, it's been taking place all along. And the trend towards funerals with embalming and the commodities such as caskets and outer burial containers, these are all as recent as Civil War times and the industrialization era. Those are when it really, that's when we started to develop traditions other than plain old burial.
Okay, yeah, so all about those laws, and people really worry, is this legal? Can I do this? How do I start to figure out how I make this happen?
This has to be one of the most frequently asked questions I receive when I talk to people about Colorado Burial Preserve is I didn't even really realize it was legal. But as I just said, we have cultures in our community that have been practicing their own versions of natural burial because it is part of their faith the whole time. You know, every state has dedicated religious cemeteries where green burials, or they would just call them burials, but that those are practiced. And Also, when you look at the most minimal of burials, for people that are really trying to uh, minimize the cost of a burial, to not have embalming, to only use a shroud or a reused container, that type of thing. Yeah, when you look at people who have been buried in the most humble of ways, those are probably not far off from green or natural burials as well. So typically there is not going to be a law that says you have to have a vault, you have to have a casket. These are left up to the policies of the cemetery. Sometimes it might feel like a law if the cemetery is telling you, no, that's just not possible. But that doesn't mean there's a law on the books saying that you have to be encased in a vault or you must be embalmed before burial. There's no place in the United States where you must be embalmed before burial. Um,
But
and
just to clarify, so it is legal in every state, right? In all 50 states.
yes, absolutely.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
There's only one law that I know of that would prevent a green burial, and that's if you die in Alabama and want to be buried in a different state, there's a law that you have to be embalmed to leave Alabama. But that is not the same. Those same laws don't touch what's happening inside the cemetery, which in most cases is going to be up to the discretion of the cemetery management, unless, of course, if it's a municipal cemetery, they might have some, city regulations around the way their cemetery is run. But this is not that natural burial itself isn't legal. That's just they get their mandate from their city council. And if they say, you must sell a vault every time, that's kind of a different question. But yeah, I would say every state it's going to be legal to have a natural burial. And then, of course, Green Burial Council certification is one of the ways to make it easier to find a cemetery whose policies might be more friendly towards, they're already ready for green burial, as opposed to you're going to have to walk in and make this argument. I know it's not the law, so why do you require a vault? We go to a green friendly cemetery so we don't have to have that conversation. So here it is, green burial legal in all 50 states. We have Jewish and Muslim cemeteries in all 50 states.
Oh yeah, here's a big one. The water. Everyone's always concerned about, is it going to contaminate the water we drink? Should I worry if I live close to one of these green cemeteries? Tell me about that.
Yeah, you do hear this one when it comes to the question of new green burial grounds trying to develop themselves. Seems like every neighbor is concerned about what might be happening with the water table in that area. Firstly, I would say I might be a little more concerned if I lived next to a conventional cemetery, because they are burying an unknown number of bottles of embalming chemicals with their decedents. And same thing with their management of the green sod lawn. There takes a significant chemical burden to fertilize and green up your sod. So the truth is that when we have the water table, um, it's way down deep below the surface. And when we do a natural burial, it's right up at the very tip top of the surface. So it's only about 3.5 to 4 feet deep at most natural burial sites. And the reason for that is you want oxygen to reach the process of this return of the body to the earth. And also plant roots. The meadow we're trying to grow on the green burial site, those plants have a better ability to make use of those resources from the gift of the body to the earth at this shallower depth. So meantime, the actual water that we put down, when we're trying to seek it with our wells, is way, way, way below the surface. And in between, we have this incredible miracle of nature, and that is soil is one of the best natural filters out there. And if you have a air filter at home or if you have a fish tank at home, you know that we use activated carbon inside those filter cartridges, because the carbon has this ability to, yeah, filter and bind to those pollutants. And so carbon natural compounds, or organic compounds, excuse me, are a huge um, component of soil that give us this filtering effect. So certainly there are kind of common sense best practices. You wouldn't want your burial ground, you wouldn't want your burial site to be right on the bank of a creek, because firstly, floods happen. And we don't want it to be immediately right next to water like that in terms of the chemical and biological processes either. But if we're following these sort of common sense principles around setbacks from active water sources, there's really no reason to be specifically worried about an unembalmed person polluting any water. In fact, I'd be more worried about the substances that are running off of a conventional cemetery.
I had no idea that we release more chemicals during the day than you do during decomposition. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Sure. I mean, think the thing about burial is that it just takes place the once, and Mother Nature has all rest of time to reclaim the body, recycle those nutrients, do the filtration with the soil. So yeah, if you think of what's in your household trash, what comes out of your car, what the doctor's office has to throw away when we're done there, the amount of chemicals we're exposed to and exposing nature to throughout our lives is way higher than we could ever do with just the one time
Yeah,
in our death.
interesting. Yeah, so the wild animal question people ask a lot, am I get how do I know it's not going to be, dug up by some animal walking around? And
Yeah.
will they smell, and want to dig? So,
Right. I do get this question a lot too, because of course, Colorado Burial Preserve, it's rugged and wild out there. We do have wildlife, but we don't have problems with animals disturbing the grave. I mentioned the typical burial depth for natural burial is 3.5 to 4 feet. And that also, we don't want to extract anything from the site. So if you've been to a natural burial ground, you see these mounds. And that's because all of the soil that got removed to dig the grave gets piled back up on top. And together you get what we call an odor barrier. Um, uh, uh, Creating enough depth with that filtering soil that we don't find that the smell creeps out onto the surface. There's not something that a human visitor would notice, and it's not something that would attract a wild animal either. um uh as it says, they're more interested in their normal prey sources than doing all that work. It's a lot of work. I said we really want the people to be able to participate in the natural burial. If you ever have had the privilege of doing it, it's an immense amount of effort moving that much soil. So animals are going to go for their kind of lowest hanging fruit in terms of their food sources, and we are not finding that the fact that someone's buried there is an attractant. The other thing I would say is the reason vaults became prominent is not to um, prevent odor from being released, although certainly they do seal the casket in. um Vaults were first developed in the Victorian era of when the modern medical field was first being developed, and science was really coming to medicine. Those doctors needed cadavers to practice their theories on and learn surgery, etc. At that time in the Victorian era, grave robbing was an actual problem. And so the burial vault was developed as a way to protect your person from humans, who had some kind of economic incentive to go through all that work of moving the soil. And in later years, more recently, the reason the cemeteries require them is because the vault gives this strength over the burial site, which causes us to have a nice flat lawn. It is easy to mow when you don't have dips and mounds that you might get at a natural burial site. Then also it makes a nice flat, smooth environment for your foot traffic, for your visitors. And so, yeah, the reason we have vaults is more to do with cemetery maintenance than it is anymore about protecting the loved one in their buried state. I think the earth, the amount of soil we're piling up above them does a good job of protecting them on its own.
Okay, so as green burial grows in popularity, all kinds of new stuff out there. So tell me about tree pods and mushroom soup.
Sure. Tree pods are, oh, I thought there might have been a picture. So, this image of a tree pod has gone viral. That is, so we are talking about giving our bodies back to the earth where the nutrients that were once giving us life can give life to other plants and animals and etc. Um, but this image of a full body tree pod, it makes the rounds periodically on social media. It went viral because, oh, I think people are very, um, the idea of becoming a tree in after your bodily life is over. Oh, it's so romantic. It's very easy to be attracted to. But there's a lot more steps. Mother Nature takes our bodies through a lot more steps than simply planting a tree with the freshly deceased human. So, the first thing that happens is your gut bacteria after death. They escape your intestines and come out, and those are the first sort of natural line of decomposition that takes over the body. And then those bacteria themselves can become food for the soil bacteria, for the fungi that are in the soil. And so we have this microbial process that takes place first. The body can heat up to some extent during that process. So you wouldn't want to just plant the roots of a nursery tree right with an unprocessed human body. We want the microbes to do their work first, get the heat of the decomposition gone, then the sort of microscopic soil creatures, the worms, let's see, what are they called? Those little roly polies, all nature's forest floor decomposers need to eat those bacteria, need to excrete the waste from consuming them. And then we start to have, like, wow, that excreted waste can break down. And now it goes through all these layers of processes before it can become real tree food. The other part about that tree pod that went viral is it shows the body in kind of an upside down fetal position, so that it would be, I don't know, kind of more the shape of a root ball. Um, and yeah, I think people are attracted to the naturalness of that image. But one of the tenets of natural burial, one of the other reasons for this 3.5 to 4 foot depth of the burial site is we want to make the smallest hole that we can out there in the forest and do as little disruption as we can. So if it's a small person only wrapped in a shroud, well, I'm only going to make my hole 5'5" in height, just tall enough for this 5'3" person to fit nicely in it. And so in order to plant this fetal position with tree root thing, we would need to bring in much bigger equipment to dig that kind of hole. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the dignity of the burial coming up. But the thing about this, okay, when you picture pallbearing, you picture carrying your loved one across the cemetery to the final resting place. the person is laid out flat. They're stretched out and they're either in a carrying basket, they're in a biodegradable container with handles, or, if they're shrouded, they can be on a board. And the reason for that is to give them handles, and to give them a stiffening. An unembalmed deceased person they can be sort of floppy. So they might, if you tried to pick them up, they might bend at the waist, and you want that stiffening board below them to make it easier to carry. If you had a person in a fetal position, I don't know of a cemetery or a funeral home who's doing it that way, because the equipment's not designed for it. The hole is not designed for it. It's not easier at all to carry the person. So you might need, again, heavy equipment to even do that, and kind of dangle the person the way you would dangle a tree over a big hole. So, I really want people to experience what it means to give your loved one back to the earth. And I don't think dangling them from a crane is the way we're trying to do that. So, yeah, I think, this is a neat picture of a forest burial ground. We can absolutely become food for the trees, but we don't need a new invention on how to do that. This is the natural world's response to death. These cycles take place whether or not we are promoting them or encouraging them in our own death practices. So, the tree pod thing it's a weird idea based on a good idea. And I just think that the simplicity of the original way is good enough. So, around the mushroom shroud or mushroom suit, there's kind of a similar story here. Again, the soil takes the body back to the earth whether or not we do anything. Mushroom spores, fungal spores exist in every soil everywhere on Earth. So, someone invented this idea that what if we lace our shroud or our burial clothing with spores? Won't that assist with the process of returning the body back to the earth? The fact is, there has not been scientific evidence to say, yeah, those spores really made a substantial difference with the body decomposition process. And in fact, if we are trying to protect this beautiful forest, it's got its own network of mycelium and fungi, already interacting with these plants and trees. So, some burial grounds, especially if they're on the conservation mission side, they're going to say, we really don't want to introduce these spores that came from a lab. They're not native to our environment. Or the fungus that are already living in the roots of these trees, let's focus on letting those do their natural work instead of introducing a commoditized product that may or may not have any benefit to the land, and the process of taking the body back.
Well, this kind of falls in line with that conversation. And in other terms, we hear quite a bit, and these are kind of used interchangeably, I think, that human composting and natural organic reduction. Is that as green as we hear it is?
Yeah.
Is it for real?
I would even say myth 5B, human composting and green burial are the same. And then secondly, this question of how we rate them on their whether or not they're environmentally friendly. So body composting is a newer thing. This is a new invention. It's not legal in every state. It's coming. It's becoming legal in a growing number of states. But what it is instead of this process of decomposition taking place in the grave, a body composting, it takes place in a controlled vessel where they can control the temperature, the moisture level, the amount of oxygen, and they lay the body in with what they call bulking agents. And so this is similar to the way you might start a compost pile in the garden. We want to load in organic material, so that the body can be broken down in this controlled way. In a natural burial, It's hard to say how long it takes to completely convert the body back to the soil. It's probably between 5 to 12 years in most places. Human body composting, they can get it done in weeks to months. So I've heard 6 weeks, 3 months, that kind of time frame. So through the technological control of the process, they can offer a little bit more certainty of how the process is going to go, but they lose the naturalness of it. The fact that, we didn't really have to do anything, and Mother Nature was going to take all of us back one way or another, someday or another. So, okay, people love body composting because it's a little similar to cremation. It's similar in that you can take back the soil when it's finished. In a green burial ground, that's it. You're buried. I said we only do it once per person, so you're dedicated back to the earth in that spot. And typically, a disinterment would not be practiced, meaning it's very rare to dig someone up when it has been a natural burial. But in a body composting, we're doing that on purpose because we want to give it back. Um, so like a cremation, the body composting, they do have to grind up the bones. They can't give it back when the bones are still recognizable. So they use this controlled facility composting technology to get the soft tissues rapidly gone. And then they sift out the bones and they use a cremulator, a cremation processor, to break down the solid matter and kind of rejoin it to the soil and give it back to the family anyway. So body composting is a green process. It's certainly greener than cremation, which has a high carbon footprint around the fuels. In a body composting, we are sequestering carbon when we make compost out of the body and also all those other stuff. But there's a big infrastructure footprint to do all of that. For example, the alfalfa that goes into the beginning of a body compost, well, that comes from the industrial agricultural side of our food chain. So this is, alfalfa comes from the industry that makes feed for animals. It has a very high water cost. So to irrigate the fields where the alfalfa is grown, and then it's trucked to the facility where the composting takes place. And the facility has its own footprint on the utilities and all the different equipment they use and the commute for the technician who oversees this process. Yeah, I do think that a lot of those kind of carbon emission factors are uh, offset by the fact that we return the body to the soil. But natural burial just has a simplicity where none of that is necessary. Uh, Nobody has to monitor. I mean, yeah, we monitor the way the plants are growing, the way the mound is returning to the earth, but we don't have this industrial footprint of maintaining a facility where bodies have to go to be reduced. So, and the one thing that I will always be on the side of natural burial is greener, is we have this incredible opportunity. Not every site that allows a natural burial will have a native habitat conservation mission, but when we talk about how much carbon is sequestered in a body composting compared to a cremation, for example, those calculations typically stop on the day that the body was disposed of in that facility. Like, yes, we sequester more carbon with composting than we do with cremation. However, if we're planting native species and promoting the protection and growth of native habitat and biodiversity, that protected space can sequester carbon long into the future. We talk about it in perpetuity when it's a cemetery. Um, Native habitats, more so than a manufactured forest, are, incredible sinks for sequestering carbon because they have a resiliency to come back year after year, and to keep growing even when there's a drought or a disturbance, because these plants are designed to be living, or they've evolved to live in this environment, so they're good at doing this carbon sequestration work of growing, no matter if we can provide them with resources or if the conditions are ideal or less than ideal. So, I think you could have a very green funeral if you had body composting, and then, we're able to find a place where that resulting soil could be managed for conservation and become host to native biodiversity. But natural burial grounds are already doing that, and we save the infrastructure footprint around having to reduce the body through a technological means, and we just let Mother Nature reduce the body herself and start right away on doing the most good with conservation management.
So we're just, as humans, overcomplicating things as usual.
You know, I have to admit, before we move away from green cemeteries into green funerals, um, green burial has a geography problem. I mean, that's one of the reasons for the Green Burial Council is we want to promote the spread of green burial sites to every community. And if you don't have a place that's offering natural burial grave sites near you, body composting is an interesting alternative. Especially until we get the every cemetery allowing natural burials. If you want to turn mother into a rose bush, body composting is one of the most realistic ways. So I do think there's a place for it in greener death care. I just, as a myth, I would hate to have it be my myth 5B, are green burial and natural organic reduction the same? No way, they're not the same at all.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a more complicated version because we introduced technology to something that has always been natural. But the results are interesting. I don't oppose it, especially if someone feels like, there isn't a green cemetery near me, but I want those remains to be near me. Where I am here in Colorado, I'm about 2 hours away from the Denver metro, and some people are, yeah, I want to be returned to nature, so the geography is no question. Get me out there where it's beautiful. But others are, I visit my loved ones at the cemetery once a month, or I always go on Memorial Day. And so, yeah, for the urban populations, I think there's an argument for natural organic reduction, but for a place where green burial is possible and practical, I do believe it's greener.
Well, I'm excited we're moving into the funeral part because I think people are always pleasantly surprised at when they see pictures of green funerals and what they can be, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But goes back to something we kind of addressed at the beginning, but embalming, is it required legally in every state? Do I have to embalm?
Yeah, it's confusing because the answer is no. Embalming is almost never legally required. Uh, but we have wording on the price list at your funeral home that's kind of vague about it. It says, except in certain cases, embalming is not required by law. However, if you want to have a funeral home with a viewing, the funeral home is legally allowed to require it. So that's not the same as saying you had to be embalmed, except you might be sitting in a funeral home where they're sort of implying that you have to be embalmed. So I mentioned this already. Okay, some states might have, like here in Colorado, it says, well, if the funeral home takes custody of you, they must embalm or refrigerate within 24 hours. of taking custody of the person. And that law was written at a time when not every funeral home had refrigeration on site, and now they all do. So, okay, they're legally required to do something other than just abandon the remains to their fate at room temperature. But the embalming specifically is not required because refrigeration is a perfectly good legal option. And even in kind of a funeral home where they're saying, okay, so what I mean is even if we want to view the body, typically it's not a law that we have to have embalming for viewing. The reason embalming is usually recommended, or it might sound like it's a requirement, is because it gives the funeral home a lot of control over the way the person looks. It can reduce the number of microbes on the surface. It will slow the natural processes down. It's not permanent, but it does slow down the rate of decomposition. So, yeah, if you want a funeral home with a long amount of outside of refrigeration, room temperature time with the loved one, sometimes embalming might be a good idea, and that's what we're hearing from funeral homes, not that it's a legal requirement.
Well,
And
this might just kind of, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I would just say that I also kind of the flip side of that, I say, yeah, sometimes embalming is a good idea, but a lot of times it's not necessary at all to be able to spend time with the person, to have a viewing, to help with dressing them or washing them. Washing soap and water does an incredible job at reducing the number of microbes. It's also an ancient ritual of care for our loved ones, a final bath before the shrouding. So, yeah, especially in a death that was peaceful, a death that was at home, there's really nothing about that body that's any more harmful to the loved ones, the people who are nearest to them, than they were when they were an ill person in their final illness at home. So we do want to check the exact ins and outs of the way the law is written for the state, but typically it's not going to be a law, and it usually is not a practical requirement either.
Well, that probably kind of blends into the next question, but it really is it more safe and sanitary for me to be around my loved one if they are embalmed? Is there any question of the safety and sanitary concerns?
The only things that okay, so as an embalmer, when we receive training about bloodborne pathogens, the kind of things that we're protecting ourselves against, bloodborne pathogens means a disease you can get from someone else's body fluids, HIV, hepatitis, maybe tuberculosis. Um, those are more dangerous coming out of a living person's body fluids than they are out of a deceased person in most cases. The people who are alive are breathing and coughing. If there was, yeah, any type of fluids that are present. When we're living, those pathogens are live, they're infectious, they're looking for their next host. They're going to be damaged by the cold temperatures of a dead body, even just down to room temperature and then down to refrigeration temperature. And this person is no longer sort of spreading their germs out. They're just in there now. And so we can do a lot with, I mentioned topical, just cleaning the person. There's other sort of home remedies that we can use in the mortuary setting. Alcohol is a sanitizer. Vinegar can be used to dry and cauterize if there is any trauma or wounds. So there's a lot that we can do without introducing formaldehyde and without going through the full invasive embalming process by simply focusing on the surface cleanliness of the person and using these safer, greener products. Uh, so this is an expert vouching for what I've just said, is that the no one is saying that embalming is needed for a health reason. It's more to do with the aesthetics of a funeral, how much control we have over how the body looks, and how quickly or slowly it starts to break down. So we don't have any health agency telling us that embalming was going to be better for public health or for worker health. And in fact, I would add to that, formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. So not only is embalming not necessary to protect health, but it does represent a workplace exposure to a carcinogenic chemical for the embalmer. And it's a gas in its natural state, so it creates all these fumes. It's a tough environment. So it's also invasive, the embalming procedure. If it's not necessary, I think that just simply spending time with the unembalmed person is a meaningful way to care for them.
Well, that's a great segue into the dignity of green burials. And I think this was one of my biggest surprises the first time I went to a green cemetery and saw just how beautiful and peaceful they are. It's really, I think when you say green burial, people conjure this image like it seems so raw and not welcoming or warm, but it's really the opposite of that.
There's a lot of things about natural burials to me that are yeah, so beautiful and meaningful, and absolutely, with the most of respect, this gift of the person back to nature, which has always sustained us. But I also think this myth comes from a little bit, like, it's how we understand embalming and the conventional or traditional funeral. um Certainly, when someone is pro embalming, it's to say, well, we want them to be able to look their best. I want them to be able to, wash off these signs of illness and pump them back up, and give them this more lifelike appearance. uh, uh, that's a definition of dignified, and I don't oppose embalming for situations or cultures where that appearance is really important. Or again, we have a lot of outside of refrigeration time that we're trying to pass with this person. So yeah, for me, I feel like dignity can be defined a lot of different ways. But we're not trying to uh stop the person from going back to the earth. We all are going to be returned to the earth one way or another. And simply to for me, the fact that we're not using preservatives does not impact the dignity of it. And then we have this invitation with natural burial to participate in the service, in any way that seems fitting for that group of loved ones. So this could mean a religious funeral, this could mean military honors, this could mean spending time with their body before the burial. This could mean helping to backfill the grave and shoveling by hand and taking part in planting the seeds of the next generation of life that's going to come out of this gift to the earth. So it can be incredibly meaningful. And just the fact that we're inviting decomposition into the process, for me, doesn't change the dignity of it at all. And we've already talked about the fact that you can still see the person. In fact, they're going to look a lot like they looked when they died. If the conditions with which they were spending their final hours surrounded by loved ones were good enough for them, then I think this funeral surrounded by loved ones, it's almost the same. So that for me, the dignity comes from the gathering. It comes from the fact that we can have ritual when we take part in these ancient traditions. And we can bring in sort of, whatever religious and cultural practices are important. And then, yeah, we offer another level of meaning towards letting people understand how nature can benefit from the fact that we have lived and then died. So for me, that's a really important gift, and is eminently dignified.
Mhm. So this gets into the religious and spiritual beliefs. Are there any things to be concerned about? Does this go against beliefs of my religion or the spiritual practices?
Certainly, I do know of religions and cultures that prefer cremation. So, maybe, but natural burial has, as I started by saying, has sort of always been a mainstream practice until more recent times. So, ancient religions are absolutely. I should have said that the other way. Natural burial is compatible with our ancient religions. Jewish and Muslim communities have been practicing this the whole time. Jesus was buried in a shroud. I love to remind that when I talk to Christian families because, even though we think of traditional Christian burial to be the one with all the trappings at the cemetery, it wasn't in the ancient Middle East, and it wasn't even in early American history. So I think that natural burial can align with a lot of different faiths and practices, including just reverence for science, or if religion's not as important, just giving back to the planet can be almost like a religion for some people. So for me, these really can reflect our values no matter what faith tradition we might be from. So that is the end of our prepared myths. We do have a little bit of time to we'll check and see if there's been any questions or any misconceptions or rumors you might have heard that need to be addressed by the experts. We do have our previous webinars available on the website. So we do them every other time. We're either talking to cemeteries and funeral homes, professional education development, and then we also do this sort of basic info to the public. So the webinars are a great resource. The middle link goes to our provider maps. That's how you can find the cemeteries, funeral homes, and green burial products that are going to be accessible in your area. And you can sign up for the newsletter as well. This is our donation link again. I'll leave this up for a second and then I'll go back to the ones with those other resources in case I was too fast on any of those links. Before we say goodnight to everyone, can we answer any questions about natural burial or any viral videos you might have seen about it or issues in your area? Tonight's webinar is going to be, it'll be added to the same link that says previous webinars. The recording of this very one will be available on there within the next couple of days. It doesn't happen instantly. It has to be manually uploaded. So don't look for it right now, but it'll be there. And that would be a great way to spread the word about natural burial in your community.
Oh, we just got one question here.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen.
I am a funeral director with GBC Certified Funeral Home. Do you offer any webinars specific to funeral homes and directors?
Yeah, we sure do. So if you go under the events tab on the greenburialcouncil.org website, they're not called webinars, they're called peer-to-peer forums and they're webinars. But so that those are the ones that are sort of by funeral and cemetery folks for funeral and cemetery folks. And so that is available there. And I would say also that the Green Burial Council, we have a continuing education course. Sorry, it's not certified for CEs, but it is something that we developed for mortuary students. And so it's free. You can arrange to have myself or one of the other funeral directing board members teach your staff or your interns kind of everything we know about why, how, and when to make natural burial a part of your funeral business. That's all under the peer-to-peer forums on the events tab on the website.
Okay. You must have covered everything because that's all the questions.
Okay. Um, the best way to reach us is going to be through the GBC, kind of any one of those links will take you to our website, greenburialcouncil.org. And the Green Burial Council has one full-time employee managing the email. So that's info@greenburialcouncil.org. And Krista would be able to forward your inquiry to the expert, tailored to the question. So that's the best way to reach us. Want to thank you, Dawn, for doing this with me and for all of you who registered and attended tonight. And thank you, too, for spreading the word about natural burial in your communities. I know that we can do a lot of good for the planet and a lot of good for our communities and families when they're grieving somebody. So it's important work.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everyone. Good
Thank
night.
you. Have a good night.